Welcome back, ladies and germs, to part two of our gain structure conversation. I had some guys hit me up and say, well, JR, when I set my left, right, front of house at zero or unity, this system is crazy loud, and I can't get the channel gain up enough to where I'm getting a decent feed in the monitors. Because remember, our input trim or input gain on each channel affects the amount of gain we're sending to our auxiliary sends, which feeds our monitors. Well, that's where we use a little bit of common sense, and where, understanding these relationships in gain and developing a feel for your system really kicks in, because you just simply turn down the main output, the left-right output. I have some bands that I do walk-ins on, and the system is just so efficient and hot that I got to run the left-right out as low as like negative 20 dBu or something like that. And the channels aren't really getting hit hard either. It's just where it is. In that exact scenario with that exact system, if I'm outside or I'm in a bigger room, I will obviously turn up that left-right, a bit. So these are things that are super elementary to those of us that have been doing this for decades, but is necessarily not for those of you that are beginners or intermediate, engineers, or I would call you sound people at this stage of the game, because you really don't get the engineer title until you've been in this business long enough to understand, a little bit about electrical engineering, a little bit about acoustical engineering. You got to pretty much have a toolbox full of install experience, live mixing experience, and even a little bit of studio experience. It doesn't hurt any to be a live sound engineer, quote unquote. Until you reach that point, you're just kind of a sound guy, or a sound girl, So yeah, understanding that relationship is super huge, and getting your system where you want it. A lot of times, if I'm on a new rig I've never run before, the kick really kind of sort of dictates where I'm going to run left and right. Now, if I get done with sound check and feel like my vocals still need a little bit more punch, I will go back and turn down all the band instruments, drums, bass, guitar, keys, all that kind of stuff, any kind of electronic drum stuff that might be going on, or if there's a percussion section, I'll turn all that down and turn left, right, up. So I'm basically raising, the vocals in the mix without having to raise the vocal channels or the vocal subgroup. Those are all really cool, super, efficient tricks that you learn in this business. And that's really kind of my go-to. If I'm not getting vocals cutting enough, then I turn the rest of the band down. It's not always about turning everything up. That is a huge mistake. That's a super rookie mistake, because you just get to a point where you hit the ceiling of what the system is efficient at. You hit the ceiling of what the room can handle. Or if you're outside, it's really going to be more about the system, because, outside can tolerate whatever you throw at it, but the system can't. So you have to understand those relationships. Sometimes stage volume's out of control. I mean, let's just admit that we have guitar players and drummers who, tend to want to, just get louder and louder as the night goes on, or they're used to playing in environments where they're super loud because they don't have really good sound reinforcement systems to work with. I run into this with bands that are used to playing like your corner pub, and then they kind of graduate into, like, say they're a low B-rated band, A being the top echelon of cover bands, C being the guys that are just getting out of their garage and backyard parties and starting to play the club scene. B is where most, I'd say 75% of the cover scene market exists, is in that B category. So if you're a low B band and you're just graduating into an A-rated room, the rooms are rated the same way, then you may be used to playing small rooms where the only thing you ran in the sound system was really vocals or any kind of direct instrument, like an acoustic guitar or a keyboard or a drum pad or something like that. Everything else just kind of, flew from the amps. In that scenario, yeah, you probably would have to push your guitar amp a little bit, and the drums could really open up and do their thing. But when you get into bigger rooms, that doesn't mean that you have all the sonic room in the world to just kind of do whatever you want to do volume wise. It usually means the opposite, because it usually means now you're dealing with a sound engineer, not a sound guy, who has a system that is correct and can give you what you want in your monitors, whether it's ear monitors, which is what we all prefer, or it's wedge monitors. So, that's the scenario where you got to turn things down, where you got to get the drummer to back off a little bit, especially if you have a loud drummer and a soft-spoken singer. That's an absolute nightmare no matter how you shake it. So in those scenarios, I pretty much turn down everything but vocals. I always protect vocals at the top of the mix. It should be vocals, kick, and snare, and then guitar and bass, keys, all that kind of stuff layers underneath of that. If you're doing, rock and roll, or you're doing hip hop or dance variety type stuff, that's typically the mix you go to. Jazz, I would mix a little differently, and we can do a video about how to mix different genres of music different ways, because they all have their own little quirks that make them what they are. An engineer understands all those different quirks because he's spent decades of his life mixing across various genres of music. So in that scenario, there's times where I'll pull somebody completely out of the house mix. And just because you have wedge monitors doesn't mean that now you can throw 120 dB of wedge monitor on the stage and that's okay because you turned your amp down. No, you still need to be super conscious of your stage volume, because your stage volume is always going to rob you of what the house mix can possibly give you. In a perfect world, you want your front of house engineer to have complete control over everything in the mix. Now, that's assuming that the guy knows what he's doing and he's competent and you can trust him with that. Sound guys, sound engineers, I don't have to tell you that, we are being handed the band's hard work and talent in that scenario, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we are giving them the absolute best house mix that we can give them and not check out really for any reason. Like, I can't stand guys that are set it and forget it. That's where you just set the mix and forget it and let it ride. I am constantly moving, specifically, fader gain around pretty much from song to song, depending on the band. Some bands are just rock solid, man, and it's like you can set it and kick back a little bit and just focus on, flying the vocal effects in and out. But in that scenario where we have a loud drummer and a soft singer, man, I push the vocals as much as I can and put everything else down. I'll get the vocals at the ceiling of the system if I really absolutely have to, and the room can tolerate that kind of volume, and then layer everything underneath of it. Because, it's otherwise, if so much of this music that we mix is vocal driven. Country music is a great example. Country music is all about vocals. There's usually 3 and 4 part harmony on everything. A lot of rock and roll was like that. You take, the Beatles changed all that. They had 3 and 4 part harmonies on everything. So that's a lot of rock and roll was layered that way. And if you don't get the vocals right, man, you can have the greatest drum mix in the world or the greatest guitar tone. It's just still going to be trash. A good engineer understands the dynamics and the relationships between all those things. Now, I know these aren't super technical conversations that we're having, but they're extremely relevant to what we do behind the mixer. And until we kind of wrap our head around these sort of parameters, and these are the kind of things, again, like I said a few videos back on TikTok, these are the kind of things that are super hard to teach, and in some cases you just can't teach. You got to develop a feel for it. You got to look over the shoulder of somebody who knows better than you, and I still do that. There's times I get around guys that I super respect, and I'm asking questions, and I'm like a 12-year-old sponge, man. I'm just trying to suck it up. I'm interested in everything. So you never stop learning, but a lot of this is just developing a feel for your system, developing a feel for having a lot of experience on a variety of different systems, and developing a feel on how each of those different systems respond. Coming back to the system tech conversation, really doing your homework at home, reading manuals and watching YouTube video reviews on different gear. And I mean, I spend an enormous amount. I guarantee you I have literally hundreds of thousands of hours of my life doing just that. Just reading manuals. Back before the internet, you just had manuals. So you would buy like the Sound Reinforcement Handbook by Yamaha, and man, I'd study that thing cover to cover. I probably had 50 copies of that over the years because I keep giving them out to my students or my interns or people in churches that I'm working with and doing workshops and training and that kind of stuff. That book has just the information in there is just unbelievably valuable to who you are as a sound guy or a sound engineer. But it doesn't stop there. Every time a new line of gear comes out, man, I'm interested. I'm super geeking out. I'm on, YouTube watching reviews and trying to learn as much as I can learn about all the gear that is in the middle market, which is the market that I work predominantly. And, trying to get out and hear different systems. Sometimes I'll drive an hour and a half to go see a band that I've seen 1,000 times because that venue or that production guy that day is using something I haven't heard yet. And I'm just genuinely interested in what it sounds like, and I want to ask some questions about it and, see how the guy likes it. If he's somebody I know and I respect, his opinion is going to carry super huge weight for me when I am asked to design and install systems for churches and municipalities and, nightclubs and things like that. I always want to give my clients the absolute most bang for their buck. And, the reason we charge the money we charge to do consulting and stuff like that is because we have those hundreds of thousands of hours invested in our toolbox, that thing that we pull from all the time to help us troubleshoot and to help us, move forward. Gain structure is at the absolute heart of so much of all that, understanding the relationships between, like, now you have all this powered stuff now. So you added another layer into your gain structure, to where in passive world, like I run all my passive amp racks wide open. Unless I'm doing something weird or correcting for something in a room or something, those things are set it and forget it. The amps come on, they set it wide open all the time, and I have all the magic icing of the cake happening in the system processor and in some cases just in the mixer, because these new digital consoles give you so much processing power right out of the console. You really don't need a whole lot in the way of system processing. You just don't. I mean, unless you're running a 3 or 4 way rig that really needs some processing, and those rigs do. If you're just running a 2-way rig with aux sub, and I run an analog crossover on my aux sub in my amp rack, and my left-right tops are just being processed right from the console, so I don't blow a bunch of money on drive racks and stuff like that. Now I have a drive rack in my 850 rig, my EAW 850 rig that I use for big outdoor things, because it's a 4-way rig. I use the drive rack for low, mid, high, and then I use that analog crossover for a aux sub setup, and it works fine. Are there better processors out there for that rig? Absolutely, but I'm all about ROI, return on investment. And right now my drive rack gets it done, especially considering that big rig only goes out a handful of times a year. So I'm not really stressing over it. I'd love to have a UX8800 EAW processor that's made specifically for that rig. But yeah, I don't see the sense in spending another $1,500, $2,000 for a processor when what I have works. No one's complaining about it. I think it sounds great. Does it sound as good as a UX8800? Absolutely not. But no one's complaining, and I'm trying to make money, so that's kind of the way that works. We'll do a whole video on the business side and that whole return on investment idea when you're buying gear and stuff like that, because it really needs to be a conversation that we have. A lot of you guys are just gear junkies, and I'm a gear junkie too, and you buy gear and buy gear and buy gear, not really thinking about what's really going to make you money. Sometimes we get stuck in this keeping up with the Joneses mentality, and when some new gear comes out, everybody wants to go run and sell their old stuff and buy the new stuff. I'm not that guy, and I don't steer any of my clients in that direction when I'm doing install stuff. I sell them stuff and install stuff I know works and gets it done. Gain structure is a huge part of that when I'm doing the training with those guys, because like I was saying, with all this active gear, now you have another layer of, gain to contend with in the box itself. I was just doing an install a few weeks ago at a club in Maryland, and yeah, their tops, they had like JBL VRX tops that were powered, and I mixed a gig there with a band that was super cool, but I still didn't feel like the tops were really biting the way I wanted them to. So when I went back after that gig, I went back and did a subwoofer install, and we're actually getting ready to hang those VRX tops from their light rig and from the ceiling to get a little more throw. That's definitely going to help because they were on sticks originally. But I went back to those cabinets for a second time and turned the gains up on them a little bit, because I just didn't feel like they were performing the way I know they can perform. So you got to kind of work your way through all that kind of stuff. I'm not a big fan of most of the middle market active stuff, because I think it's just lackluster kind of performance. I don't think it really jams the way I want it to jam. With passive stuff, you have so much more control. You can throw so much more muscle at the drivers and process things the way you want to process things. You're not stuck with whatever the manufacturer puts in those boxes, because they rig all that stuff and design all that stuff with safety in mind, to try and save the drivers and to try and make them idiot proof, because you got a lot of idiots that buy that gear and have no idea how to run it. So they have parameters set up in a way to where you're not really getting the most that you can get out of that box. I'd much rather have a passive box where I can manipulate it the way I want to manipulate it, and it's not just plug and play. Now, if you're a DJ, that would probably work fine for you. But if you're mixing bands like I do exclusively, man, I need every little detail, working in my favor that I can get. And some of this stuff just does not perform the way I would like it to perform. So, you make the best of it, and here's a great example of how, understanding gain structure puts me in an environment where I can manipulate the gain on the box itself and the gain that I'm sending to the box from the mixer and that sort of stuff to get what I want out of it, or at least get something that's passable and that's okay. That's acceptable, and that no one's complaining and everyone thinks it sounds great. I'm usually the one guy in the room that doesn't like the mix, even when I'm mixing, because don't get me wrong. There's an acceptable part of cheese that I will tolerate, because I'm just limited by whatever gear is sitting in front of me. If I'm on my rig, it's a little different. But like, I'm a big fan of EAW, L Acoustics, D&B, RCF, all the big boys. But that ROI is kind of tough on that kind of gear, so I predominantly use passive SRX, 700 series, boxes, STX 800 series passive subs, and it totally gets it done. Everyone just raves about how good it sounds and how much they love it. I just like it. I'm not in love with it. I don't think it's great gear. I think it's very workhorse, middle of the road, middle market kind of gear, and it lasts forever. So again, return on investment. I can't argue with the return on investment of it. So I keep buying more of that old stuff because it's getting harder and harder to find. I have a whole 700 series SRX rig sitting in my shop right now that I'm going through and breathing some fresh air into and going to use as a B rig. It's hard to beat it, man. It really is, but some of this active stuff that's out, if you're in small rooms and small clubs and doing backyard parties, man, it's great. Phenomenal gear, but if you're doing anything of any kind of substance and you get, 800 to 1,500 bodies in front of the stage that's absorbing sound, you need something that can really throw, and something that can really get out there. And, having the right gear in place makes all these gain structure ideas make sense. So just thought I would revisit this conversation for a part 2 and talk a little bit more about how you just got to kind of use your instincts at some degree here. And, that left-right is going to move up and down depending on the rig, depending on the band, depending on the gear you're working with, depending on the venue you're in, and all that stuff. So don't be afraid to turn it down to make it sound better. We'll see you around, guys. Thanks.